Number 1. The Murdaugh Dynasty. In the humid, moss-draped low country of South Carolina, one name was the law. For 100 years, the Murdaugh family was the 14th Judicial Circuit. The grandfather was the solicitor, the lead prosecutor. The father was the solicitor. The great-grandfather was the solicitor. They were not just part of the system, they were the system. They were a dynasty. And Richard Alex Murdaugh was the heir. He was not just a lawyer, he was the lawyer. A courtroom hero, a powerful, charismatic, multi-million-dollar trial lawyer who could charm any jury. He was the man who won impossible cases. He lived in a sprawling 1,700-acre estate they called Moselle. He was the king of his own private kingdom. He was the ultimate courtroom hero. But this channel is about what happens when the heroes become the monsters. We are diving deep into 10 shocking cases just like this. If you enjoyed these kinds of dark investigative documentaries, make sure you subscribe and let us know by hitting the like button. The Murdaugh kingdom was crumbling. The foundation was built on a sea of lies. And in 2021, the courtroom hero was about to become a monster. The story of Alex Murdaugh's downfall is a story of pressure. He was not the hero everyone saw. He was a desperate addict. He was, by his own admission, hopelessly addicted to opioids, spending over $50,000 a week. And to feed that addiction, to maintain the dynasty lifestyle, he was committing massive fraud. He was stealing, not from banks. He was stealing from his own clients, from the little guys, from a quadriplegic, from a deaf man, from the family of his own dead housekeeper. He had stolen millions. In June 2021, the walls were closing in. His law firm was days away from discovering the theft. He was about to be exposed. He was facing financial ruin, disgrace, prison. He needed a distraction. He needed a tragedy. The date was June 7th, 2021. The kingdom was about to become a crime scene. That night, Alex Murdaugh drove to his estate, Moselle. He called his wife Maggie and his 22-year-old son, Paul. Paul was already in trouble. He was famous for a fatal, drunken boating crash that had killed a young girl. The dynasty was already cracking. Alex asked them to meet him at the dog kennels on the property. When Maggie and Paul arrived at the dark, isolated kennels, the also courtroom hero was waiting. He was armed. He was carrying a shotgun and an assault rifle. He did not argue. He did not fight. He executed his own family. He shot his son Paul twice with the shotgun. He then took the rifle and he shot his wife Maggie 5 times. He left their bodies in the dirt and he began to lie. He drove to his mother's house to create an alibi. He called 911, his voice cracking with fake hysterical grief. He told the police he had just found them, that it was a horrible, tragic mystery. It was the performance of his life. He was trying to create a tragedy so big it would make his financial crimes seem small. He was wrong. The police were suspicious from minute one. There was no grief. There was no blood on the grieving father. And there was the cell phone data, the smoking gun. Alex had sworn he hadn't been to the kennels. But a video on his son's phone captured just minutes before the murders had his voice. This, for many, was the end of the case. The smoking gun video proved he was on the scene when he swore he wasn't. I'm curious, for those who followed this trial, was that video the only piece of evidence you needed? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments. His entire alibi was shattered. The trial was a global sensation. The king was now a clown. He took the stand in a desperate, last-ditch lie. He admitted to the fraud. He admitted to the addiction. But he denied the murders. The jury did not believe a word. They deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict: guilty. Guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom hero, the Dynasty, was dead. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Subscribe if you enjoyed this part 1.
Number 2. Michael Avenatti. In 2018, America was at war with itself. And in that war, the resistance needed a hero, a fighter, a man who was not afraid to punch the most powerful man on earth directly in the face. They did not get a superhero. They got Michael Avenatti. He was the creepy porn lawyer, or CPL, as he called himself, a slick, charismatic, and camera-hungry attorney from California. He was fast-talking, he was arrogant, and he was everywhere. He was the man representing Stormy Daniels, the adult film star who claimed she had an affair with the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Avenatti was fearless. He went on CNN. He went on MSNBC. He went on every single show that would have him. He taunted the president. He mocked the president's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. He was not just a lawyer. He was a gladiator, a courtroom hero fighting for the little guy against the ultimate bully. He was the savior of the resistance. He was so popular, they were seriously talking about him running for president. This is one of the most insane falls of grace in modern history. A story of a man who flew so high, so fast, that no one saw he was drowning in his own corruption. If you enjoy these deep dives into the dark side of power and the egos that drive them, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button to let us know. The Michael Avenatti the world saw was a performance, a brilliant lie. The real Michael Avenatti was a fraud. He was not a millionaire lawyer. He was broke. His law firm was collapsing. He owed millions in back taxes. He was desperate. And that desperation is what turned the courtroom hero into a criminal. His downfall came in 2 spectacular crashes. The first was extortion. In March 2019, at the absolute peak of his presidential hype, Avenatti found a new client, a whistleblower who had dirt on the biggest sports company in the world, Nike. A normal lawyer would negotiate. A normal lawyer would file a lawsuit. Michael Avenatti was not a normal lawyer. He saw a payday, a blackmail opportunity. He went directly to Nike's lawyers, and he threatened them. He told them, "This is not just filing a lawsuit. I am going to hold a press conference the day before your quarterly earnings report, and I am going to accuse your entire company of a massive criminal conspiracy." He was threatening to tank their stock, to cost them billions, unless they paid him $25 million. He told them, "This is your get-out-of-jail card." It was a scene from a movie, a cartoon villain. But he had miscalculated. He was not talking to lawyers. He was talking to the FBI. Nike's lawyers had immediately called the feds. The entire negotiation was a sting. The entire blackmail was recorded. Just minutes after Avenatti sent his final threat, federal agents arrested him in New York. The hero was in handcuffs, but that was just one of his crimes. The other was worse. It was not extortion. It was theft. He had not just blackmailed Nike. He had stolen from the one person who had made him famous. He had stolen from Stormy Daniels. While he was on TV fighting for her, he was secretly stealing her money. Stormy had a book deal, an $800,000 advance. The money was supposed to go to her, but Michael Avenatti intercepted the payments. He forged her signature. He sent a fake letter to her publisher, directing all the money into an account that he controlled. He stole nearly $300,000 from his own client. And he spent it on his own lavish lifestyle, on Ferraris, on rent. While she was begging him for her money, he was lying to her. He told her, "The publisher hasn't paid yet." It was a depraved betrayal. The trials were devastating. In the Nike case, the jury heard the recordings. They heard his own voice blackmailing the company. Guilty. In the Stormy Daniels case, the jury saw the forged documents. They saw the bank transfers. Guilty. This case is truly baffling. A man who had the entire world in his hands, who had the media eating out of his palm, threw it all away for cash. I want to know what you think. Was this always his plan? Or did the fame and the hero worship just make him that arrogant? Let me know in the comments. At his sentencing, the hero was gone. The judge called his crimes outrageous and despicable. He called him a corrupt lawyer who had weaponized his law degree. He sentenced Michael Avenatti to a combined 19 years in federal prison. The CPL, the presidential hopeful, the gladiator, was just a con man. A courtroom hero who became a corrupt inmate. Subscribe if you enjoyed this part too.
Number 3.
Rudy Giuliani. In the 1980s, he was not just a lawyer. He was a dragon slayer. His name was Rudy Giuliani, and he was the toughest, most feared federal prosecutor in America. He was the man who did the impossible. He took on the mafia, the 5 families of New York, and he won. He used the RICO Act, a law designed to dismantle organized crime to break the mob. He was a courtroom hero, a national icon. Then came 9/11. He was the mayor of New York City, and when the towers fell, he became America's mayor. He was the calm, steady bulldog who walked through the ash and held the city together. He was a legend, a hero twice over. He was Sir Rudy Giuliani. He was Time Magazine's Person of the Year. He was untouchable. But the problem with heroes is that they can live long enough to become the villain. This is one of the most bizarre and tragic downfalls in American history. A story of a hero so obsessed with power that he shredded his own legacy. If you enjoy these deep dives into the dark side of power and the egos that drive them, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button to let us know. The corruption nightmare begins with loyalty. In 2018, Rudy became the personal lawyer for President Donald Trump. He was no longer the mafia buster. He was the fixer. And his job was not to uphold the law. His job was to bend it. The dragon slayer had become a henchman. But the real crime, the real nightmare, began on November 3rd, 2020, election night. The president had lost, and Rudy Giuliani was given his one final mission: prove that he didn't. What happened next was not law. It was a circus, a dark, chaotic fraud. Rudy held a press conference, not at the Four Seasons, but at the Four Seasons Total Landscaping, a garage door next to a sex shop. The world laughed, but it was not funny. It was an attack. Rudy began to lie publicly, viciously. He went on TV and he invented a fantasy. He claimed there was a massive, coordinated conspiracy. He claimed that voting machines had switched the votes. He had no evidence. He had no proof. But he was America's mayor. He was the mafia buster. And people believed him. And then he targeted innocent people. He singled out 2 election workers in Georgia, a mother and her daughter, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. He accused them by name of personally stealing the election. He said they were passing USB drives like vials of heroin. It was a lie, a vicious, racist lie, and his followers attacked. The 2 women were terrorized. They received death threats. They were forced to flee their homes. Rudy did not care. He kept lying. This was not law. This was defamation. This was harassment. This was corruption. His most infamous moment came at another press conference. He was sweating under the lights. He was ranting about communist conspiracies. And black hair dye began to drip down his face. He was literally melting in front of the world. He was a joke. But the law was not laughing. The nightmare had arrived. First, the license. The New York State Court disbarred him. They revoked his law license. They ruled that he had communicated demonstrably false and misleading statements to courts, lawmakers, and the public. The courtroom hero was no longer a lawyer. Second, the money.
The two election workers, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, sued him for defamation. And the jury destroyed him. They ordered Rudy Giuliani to pay the two women he had terrorized $148 million. He was financially ruined. He immediately filed for bankruptcy. Third, the irony. The mafia buster, the man who perfected the RICO Act to dismantle organized crime. In 2023, he himself was indicted in the state of Georgia under the very same RICO Act. He was charged as a co-conspirator in a criminal enterprise to overturn the election. The Dragon Slayer was now in the same category as the mob bosses he had spent his entire life hunting. It's an unbelievable fall from grace. He went from America's mayor to a bankrupt, disbarred, criminal defendant. But the question the world is still asking, do you think he really believed the lies he was telling? Or was this all just a desperate attempt to stay in power? Let me know your theory in the comments. Subscribe if you enjoyed this part 3.
Number 4. Dickie Scruggs. He was not just a hero. He was a folk hero, the king of torts. His name was Dickie Scruggs. He was the real-life David who slew Goliath. He was a smooth-talking, impossibly smart trial lawyer from Mississippi who in the 1990s decided to take on the single biggest monster on the planet, Big Tobacco. It was an impossible fight. The tobacco industry was a multi-billion-dollar legal fortress. They had never lost a single case. They buried their opponents in paperwork and lies. But Dickie Scruggs was different. He was a master strategist. He assembled a dream team of lawyers, and he found the whistleblower. The story was so epic, it was turned into an Oscar-nominated Hollywood movie called The Insider. And in 1998, the impossible happened. Scruggs won. He forced Big Tobacco to its knees. He secured the largest civil settlement in human history, $246 billion. Dickie Scruggs was not just a lawyer. He was a legend. He was the king. He had saved millions of lives. He was, perhaps, the greatest courtroom hero America had ever seen. He was now a billionaire. This channel is dedicated to these incredible stories of heroes who fall and the dark corruption that brings them down. If you appreciate this kind of deep dive investigation, subscribe now and hit the like button so you don't miss the rest of this list. The King of Torts had everything: the money, the fame, the moral high ground. He could have retired. He could have dedicated his life to charity. But that is not what kings do. The hero was addicted, not to drugs. He was addicted to winning. The story of his downfall begins with a new case, a smaller case. It was 2007. Scruggs was in a legal fee dispute. He believed another lawyer owed him millions from a Hurricane Katrina lawsuit. It was a simple civil dispute. A he said. The King of Torts should have won this in his sleep. But the king was impatient. He did not want to risk losing. He wanted a guarantee.
So the man who had beaten Big Tobacco with truth and justice decided to use a different tactic: corruption. He decided to bribe the judge. This was not a complex scheme. It was dirty. It was cheap. He had an associate, another lawyer. He gave this lawyer $50,000 in cash, and he instructed him to deliver the cash to the home of the circuit judge, Henry Lackey. He was buying a verdict. He thought he was a king. He thought he was above the law. He had just ended his entire life. Because the judge, Judge Lackey, was not a crook. He was an honest man. The moment he was offered the bribe, he called the FBI. And the FBI flipped Scruggs's associate. The bagman agreed to wear a wire. The entire conspiracy was now a sting operation. The king of torts was king of nothing. He was a target. The FBI recorded everything. They recorded Scruggs planning the bribe. They recorded him discussing the cash. They had him cold. The man who had beaten the richest corporations in the world was about to be taken down by his own arrogance. When the FBI confronted Scruggs with the tapes, the king crumbled. There was no trial. There was no brilliant defense. There was just a confession. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to bribe a public official. It was stunning. The entire legal world was in shock. This is the part of the story that is truly baffling. Why would a billionaire, a legend, risk everything, his fame, his legacy, his freedom, for a civil case he probably would have won anyway? Was this pure pathological greed? Or was he just so arrogant he thought he could never possibly get caught? Let me know what you believe in the comments. At his sentencing in 2008, the hero was gone. The judge looked at the man who had shamed the entire profession. He sentenced Dickie Scruggs to 6 years in federal prison. The king of torts was sent to jail. His law license was revoked. His legacy was shattered. He is the ultimate hero's death. A man who flew so high on justice that he completely forgot what it looked like. Subscribe if you enjoyed this part 4.
Number 5. Michael Cohen. He was not a trial lawyer. He was not a legal genius. He was a fixer, a pit bull. His name was Michael Cohen, and for over a decade, he was the shadow of Donald J. Trump. He was not just his personal lawyer. He was his consigliere, his enforcer. His entire identity was built on one single, unwavering concept: loyalty. He was the courtroom hero of Trump Tower, the man who handled all of the problems. He threatened journalists. He screamed at contractors. He would, in his own words, take a bullet for his boss. He was the ultimate loyal lawyer. But this is a story about what happens when that loyalty becomes criminal. We are diving deep into 10 cases of lawyers who broke the law. If you believe loyalty is not an excuse for corruption, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button to show your support.
The story of Michael Cohen's corruption begins with an election. The year was 2016. His boss, Donald Trump, was unexpectedly winning the presidency. But just weeks before the election, a problem emerged. A massive problem. Her name was Stormy Daniels, an adult film star who was about to go public with a story of an affair with the candidate. It was a PR nightmare, a scandal that could derail the entire campaign. The candidate panicked, and he called his fixer. Michael Cohen was given his mission: make this go away. A normal lawyer would negotiate, but Cohen was not a normal lawyer. He was a fixer. He personally created a shell company, a fake LLC. He personally took out a home equity line of credit. He wired $130,000 of his own money to Stormy Daniels' lawyer in exchange for her silence. He had fixed the problem. He had saved his boss. He was a hero. He had also just committed a federal crime. He did not know it, but that $130,000 hush money payment, made just days before the election, was not a private matter. It was an illegal, undocumented campaign contribution. It was a felony. And the fixer had just signed his own death warrant. Fast forward to 2018. Donald Trump was president. Michael Cohen was on top of the world. He had just been reimbursed by the president for his hush money. He was untouchable. But the FBI had been watching. They had been listening. They were not investigating the hush money. They were investigating everything else. They were investigating his other side hustles, his taxi business, his bank loans. And on April 9th, 2018, the hero imploded. The FBI raided his home, his office, his hotel room. They seized everything: his phones, his computers, his files. The pit bull was defenseless, and his boss, the president, the man he had taken a bullet for, did not protect him. He tweeted that Cohen was weak. He distanced himself. Michael Cohen finally realized the truth. Loyalty is a one-way street. The hero was alone. He was trapped. He was facing decades in prison. So, the pit bull did the unthinkable. He flipped. The fixer became the rat. He confessed to everything. He walked into a federal courtroom in August 2018 and he pleaded guilty. He pleaded guilty to tax fraud. He pleaded guilty to bank fraud. And he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of campaign finance violations. And then he pointed the finger. He stood in front of the judge and he swore under oath that he had paid the hush money at the direction of a candidate for federal office for the principal purpose of influencing the election. He had just implicated the sitting president of the United States in a federal crime. It was a betrayal of biblical proportions. The corruption nightmare was complete. At his sentencing, Cohen wept. He told the judge he was ashamed that he had been lost in blind loyalty. The judge was not moved. He sentenced Michael Cohen to 3 years in federal prison. Cohen's case is a deep moral question. Was he a real criminal who finally got caught, or was he just a loyal soldier who was betrayed by his boss? I want to know what you think in the comments. The fixer was broken. He was disbarred. He was shamed. He was sent to prison. He is the ultimate nightmare. A courtroom hero whose entire career was built on a loyalty that was itself a lie. Subscribe if you enjoyed this part 5.
Number 6. F. Lee Bailey. He was not just a hero. He was the original, the rock star lawyer, the man who, before TV cameras were even allowed in court, was a household name. His name was F. Lee Bailey. He was a legend, a 6'4", brilliant and ruthlessly charming courtroom brawler. He was the man who defined what a celebrity lawyer was. In the 1960s, he took on impossible trial-of-the-century cases. He got an acquittal for Sam Shepard, the doctor accused of murdering his wife, the case that inspired the movie The Fugitive. He was the hero who outsmarted everyone. This channel is dedicated to telling the stories of these heroic figures who flew too close to the sun and got burned by their own corruption. If you enjoy these kinds of investigative deep dives, make sure you subscribe and let the algorithm know by hitting the like button. F. Lee Bailey was more than a lawyer. He was an icon. And in 1995, at the end of his legendary career, he was called in for one last trial of the century. He became a key member of the O.J. Simpson Dream Team, and he was the Dragon Slayer. He was the lawyer who, in a masterful, brutal cross-examination, destroyed Detective Mark Fuhrman on the stand. He got Fuhrman to lie about his racism. He exposed the corruption in the LAPD. Many believe that F. Lee Bailey was the one who won that entire case. He was once again the greatest lawyer in America. He was invincible. But what the world didn't know was that at the exact same time he was freeing O.J., his own corruption nightmare was exploding behind the scenes. The story of his downfall begins with a different client, a client who was not famous. His name was Claude Duboc. He was an international drug trafficker, a pot kingpin. In 1994, Bailey took his case, and he worked his magic.
he negotiated a deal with the federal government. The deal was simple. Dubach would plead guilty, and he would forfeit all of his assets to the government. In exchange, he would get a lighter sentence. And one of those assets was a massive block of stock in a company called Biochip. Bailey's job was to hold that stock in a trust and then transfer it to the government after the sentencing. The stock was worth about $6 million. But Bailey was arrogant. He was the hero. He thought he was smarter than the government. He looked at that $6 million sitting in his account, and he decided it was his. He didn't transfer it. He kept it. He liquidated it. He spent it. He used his client's forfeited drug money to pay his own personal expenses. He was stealing from both his client and the United States government. The hero had become a thief. When the deal was done, the government came to collect. Mr. Bailey, where is the $6 million in stock? And F. Lee Bailey lied. He claimed it was his fee. He claimed the government had told him he could keep it as expenses. He claimed it was a verbal agreement. The courtroom hero was hiding behind a lie. The prosecutors were furious. They sued him. They dragged their own star witness in front of a judge. The judge listened to Bailey's excuses, and he did not believe him. He ruled that Bailey had stolen the money. He ordered F. Lee Bailey, the legend, to immediately return the $6 million. But Bailey couldn't. The money was gone. He had spent it all. The judge was stunned. This was unthinkable. He found F. Lee Bailey, the legend, in contempt of court. And in 1996, just months after he won the O.J. Simpson trial, F. Lee Bailey was arrested. He was sent to federal prison. He served 44 days in a concrete cell. This case is just staggering. A man, a legend, who flew so high on the O.J. victory that he thought he could steal $6 million from the federal government. I've always wondered, do you think this was pure arrogance, or was he just a con man all along? Let me know your theory in the comments. But the real nightmare was not the jail time. It was the disbarment. The hero was shamed. In 2001, the state of Florida disbarred F. Lee Bailey for life. In 2003, Massachusetts did the same. The king was banished. His 40-year legendary career was over. He died broke and disgraced. He was the ultimate courtroom hero who, in the end, was destroyed by his own corruption. Subscribe if you enjoyed this Part 6.
Number 7. Marc Dreier. He was not a courtroom hero. He was not a street fighter like F. Lee Bailey. He was the other kind of hero. The Park Avenue hero. His name was Marc Dreier. He was the image of respectability. Yale, Harvard Law School. He was tall, handsome, charming, and impeccably dressed. He was the founder of Dreier LLP, a massive 250-lawyer international law firm with gleaming offices in New York and Los Angeles. He was a lawyer to the stars. He had a $50 million beach house in the Hamptons. He had a $100 million yacht. He owned an art collection worth $40 million. He was a titan, a hero of corporate law. He was proof that the system worked. But this channel is dedicated to exposing the system's failures, the stories of heroes who were actually nightmares in disguise. If you enjoy these dark investigative stories, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button to let us know. The system wasn't working because the hero, Marc Dreier, was a complete and total fraud. His corruption nightmare is one of the biggest, most arrogant cons in legal history. Here is the lie. His massive law firm, Dreier LLP, was a sham. It was a prop, a stage. It was not making money, it was hemorrhaging money. It was a failure. Marc Dreier was broke. But he could not let the world see him fail. He had to keep up the image. So he devised a new business. He became a master con man. This was not a kickback scheme. This was not stealing from clients. This was a $700 million Ponzi scheme. Here is how the con worked. Dreier used his Harvard reputation to get in the door with the biggest hedge funds in the world. He would offer them an investment, a can't-miss deal. He would tell them that his client, a major real estate developer, was selling promissory notes, short-term loans. He would say, "Give my client $100 million for 1 month, and he will pay you back $112 million, a guaranteed 12% return." The hedge funds salivated. But there was one problem. The real estate developer didn't exist. The promissory notes were fake. Marc Dreier, the Harvard lawyer, was personally forging the entire deal. He was selling worthless pieces of paper. He would then take the $100 million from hedge fund A and use it to pay off hedge fund B, who he had conned the month before. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. And he was skimming millions off the top to pay for his yacht, his art, and his fake law firm. But what if the hedge funds wanted to meet the client? This is where the fraud becomes genius. Dreier would set up the meeting in his own gleaming conference room. The hedge fund managers would sit at one end, and at the other end would be the client, the real estate developer. Except it wasn't. It was Marc Dreier's own employee, an actor, a co-conspirator impersonating the developer. He even impersonated people on the phone. He created a complete fantasy world of fake clients, fake deals, and real money. It's baffling how he juggled this for so long. What do you think is more insane, the $700 million he stole, or the fact that he did it while running a real 250-lawyer law firm? Let me know your theory in the comments. He was an artist of deceit, and he would have gotten away with it. But in 2008, the world ended. The financial crash. The hedge funds all panicked. They all wanted their money back at the same time. The Ponzi scheme ceased. The music stopped. He couldn't pay anyone. He was trapped. So, he got desperate. He flew to Canada. He tried to impersonate another lawyer to try and steal another $45 million.
but he was sloppy. The Canadians caught him. He was arrested for impersonation. And that one small arrest caused the entire $700 million house of cards to collapse. The hero was exposed. He pled guilty to everything: conspiracy, securities fraud, wire fraud. At his sentencing in 2009, the Park Avenue lawyer was gone. The judge was horrified. He called Dreier corrupt, brazen, and a danger to the public. He said Dreier's crimes were not an aberration, they were his life. He sentenced Marc Dreier to 20 years in federal prison. The Harvard genius, the man with the yacht, the hero, will be 80 years old when he is finally released. He was a nightmare, pretending to be a dream. Subscribe if you enjoyed this part 7.
Number 8. William Lerach. He was not just a hero. He was a superhero. He was the king of class action. His name was Bill Lerach, and he was the most feared corporate lawyer in America. He was the ultimate David versus Goliath. He did not defend the rich. He hunted them. He was the hero of the little guy, the small shareholder, the mom-and-pop investor. His job was to punish corrupt corporations, and his kill list was a who's who of American corruption. He was the man who sued Enron. He sued WorldCom. He sued Drexel Burnham. He was a crusader, a courtroom hero in a white knight's armor. He recovered over $45 billion for defrauded investors. He was a legend. This channel is built on exposing the truth behind the heroes we think we know. If you believe that no one, not even the king of class action, should be above the law, then subscribe and hit the like button. Bill Lerach was so good at his job that Congress literally passed a law in 1995 specifically to stop him. He was that powerful. But what the world didn't know was that the hero, the crusader, the white knight, was corrupt. His corruption nightmare is so deeply ironic, it's almost poetic. Here is the lie. His heroic lawsuits were a sham. The entire class action system depends on one honest thing: a real, aggrieved plaintiff, a real little guy who lost money and wants to sue. Bill Lerach was impatient. He didn't wait for victims to find him. He created them. According to the federal government, Lerach and his law firm were running a massive criminal conspiracy, a 20-year kickback scheme. Here is how the con worked. Lerach paid plaintiffs. He had a secret list of clients, repeat players. He would pay them under the table every time he needed a plaintiff to start a case. He was bribing his own clients. This was not justice. This was a rigged game, a fraud. He was lying to the courts. He was lying to the public. He was manufacturing outrage. And he was making billions. He was the most successful corrupt lawyer in history. But the government was watching. For years, the Department of Justice was quietly investigating his law firm.
They knew his wins were too perfect. They knew his plaintiffs were too familiar. They began to squeeze his partners. And in 2007, the entire house of cards collapsed. His own law partners flipped. They confessed. They testified against their boss. They gave the feds everything. The secret payments, the kickbacks, the entire 20-year conspiracy. Bill Lerach, the king, was cornered. The man who took down Enron was about to be taken down by his own firm. He was trapped. There was no trial. There was no brilliant defense. The hero surrendered. He walked into a federal courtroom in 2007 and pleaded guilty to one count of conspiracy to obstruct justice. He admitted to lying. He admitted to the kickbacks. The white knight was covered in mud. This case is a stunning betrayal. A man who hunted corporate fraud was himself the biggest fraud of all. This is the question that baffles me. Do you think he started as a hero and became corrupt? Or was the entire crusade always just about the money? Let me know your theory in the comments. At his sentencing in 2008, the king was gone. The judge was furious. He called Lerach a sickness in the legal system. He said Lerach's crimes struck at the very heart of justice. He sentenced Lerach to 2 years in federal prison. He was sent to jail. He was fined $250,000. He was forced to forfeit $7.75 million. And he was disbarred. His career was over. His legacy was shattered. He was the ultimate courtroom hero who claimed to be cleaning up the system. But in the end, he was the corruption.
Number 9. Lynne Stewart. She was not a Park Avenue hero. She was not a billionaire hero. She was the other kind, the people's hero. Her name was Lynne Stewart. She was a legend, a radical lawyer, a civil rights icon, a tough, grandmotherly, defiant woman who, for 40 years, did what no one else dared to do. She defended the monsters. She represented the unrepresentable, mob bosses, cop killers, Black Panthers, terrorists. Her philosophy was simple. Everyone deserves a defense. She was the courtroom hero of the outcast, the last line of defense between the government and the damned. But this channel is dedicated to that fine line between heroism and corruption, that blur between defending a monster and becoming one. If you believe in that fight, subscribe and hit the like button. Lynne Stewart was a thorn in the side of the government. And in 1995, she took on her biggest, most unpopular case ever. She agreed to defend Omar Abdelrahman, the blind sheikh, the Egyptian radical cleric, the spiritual leader who was convicted of plotting the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. He was the most hated man in America, and Lynne Stewart defended him. She lost the case. The blind sheikh was sentenced to life in prison in a maximum security supermax facility. He was buried. But Lynne Stewart was still his lawyer. And as his lawyer,
She had one privilege. She could visit him. But because he was a terrorist, those visits came with special rules. Special Administrative Measures, or SAMs. The rules were strict. He was not allowed to communicate with the outside world. He was not allowed to speak to his followers. And Lynne Stewart, as his lawyer, had to sign a legal, binding oath promising she would not help him break those rules. She signed the paper. And then she broke her oath. This is the nightmare. In 2000, Lynne Stewart went to visit her client in prison. She knew the room was bugged. She knew the guards were watching. So, according to the federal government, she created a distraction. She faked an argument with the guards. She yelled, she screamed, she made a scene. And while the guards were distracted, her translator secretly passed messages from the blind sheikh to his followers. But she wasn't done. She then walked out of the prison. She walked to a telephone, and she called a Reuters news agency in Egypt, and she publicly read a statement from the blind sheikh, a statement calling for his followers in Egypt to renew their war. She had just used her law license as a weapon. She had smuggled a terrorist's message out of a supermax prison and broadcasted to the world. The hero had become a messenger. The government was furious. After 9/11, the game had changed. In 2002, the U.S. government arrested the radical lawyer. She was indicted. The charge? Conspiracy to provide material support to a terrorist organization. It was an earthquake. The hero was now a traitor. Her trial was a circus. The prosecution argued she was a liar, a corrupt lawyer who had knowingly helped a terrorist. They played the tapes. They showed her press conference. Her defense? I was just being a lawyer. She argued that this was not terrorism. It was free speech. She was zealously defending her client. She argued that this was a political witch hunt, that the government was punishing her for daring to defend the unpopular. The entire legal world was divided. This is the central question of this entire case, a question that still haunts lawyers today. Where is the line? At what point does defending your client stop and helping your client begin? Let me know your opinion in the comments. The jury deliberated. And in 2005, the verdict came in. Guilty. The hero was convicted. At her sentencing, the judge was lenient. He seemed to believe her motives were good. He sentenced the 65-year-old lawyer to just 28 months, a slap in the wrist. But the government was furious. They appealed the sentence. They demanded more time. And in 2010, a new judge agreed. The new judge was not lenient. He called her arrogant. He said she had lied under oath at her own trial. And he resentenced Lynne Stewart. He threw out the 28 months, and he sentenced her to 10 years in federal prison. The radical hero was broken.
Number 10. Paul Manafort. He was not a hero who fought in the courtroom. He was the other kind, the shadow
hero, the Kingmaker. His name was Paul Manafort. He was a political lawyer, a lobbyist, a man who created presidents. He was a legend in Washington, D.C. He was the insider's insider. He worked for Gerald Ford. He worked for Ronald Reagan. He worked for George H.W. Bush. He was a hero of the Republican establishment, a master strategist. He was the man you called when you wanted to win. He was rich. He was powerful. He was invincible. This channel is dedicated to exposing these invincible heroes who crash and burn. If you believe that no one, not even a kingmaker, is above the law, then subscribe and hit the like button. The kingmaker's public life was a lie. His real business was not advising U.S. presidents. His real business was lobbying for monsters. For decades, Paul Manafort was the go-to guy for the worst people on earth. Dictators, warlords, authoritarian thugs. If you were a tyrant who needed a makeover in Washington, you called Paul Manafort. And his biggest client was a man named Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian dictator of Ukraine, a puppet of Vladimir Putin. For over a decade, Manafort worked for him. He ran his campaigns, he cleaned his image, he got paid tens of millions of dollars in blood money. But this is the corruption nightmare. He knew his work was dirty, so he hid the money. This was not lobbying. This was a massive criminal conspiracy. According to the federal government, Paul Manafort was a master money launderer. He funneled his millions from Ukraine into 31 secret offshore bank accounts. In Cyprus, in the Grenadines. He washed the blood money, and then he committed tax fraud. He lived like a king on that dirty money, and he paid zero taxes on it. He defrauded the United States government out of millions. He also committed bank fraud. When the Ukraine money dried up, he lied to American banks to get fraudulent loans to pay for his $15,000 ostrich leather jacket. He was a complete and total fraud. He was a criminal hiding in a $5,000 suit, and he would have gotten away with it. But in 2016, he got greedy. He wanted one last taste of power. He became the campaign chairman for Donald J. Trump. He was back. He was on top of the world. He was running a presidential campaign. He had just stepped directly into the spotlight, and he had no idea that another lawyer was watching. His name was Robert Mueller, the special counsel. Mueller was investigating Russian interference, and he followed the money. And all the money led directly to Paul Manafort. They unraveled his entire life. They found the secret bank accounts. They found the tax fraud. They found the bank fraud. The Kingmaker was not a genius. He was just a common crook. He was indicted. He was charged. His trial in 2018 was a spectacle. The hero was gone. He was a broken old man. His own protege, Rick Gates, flipped on him. He testified against him. The prosecution just showed the jury the receipts. The $15,000 ostrich jacket. The $21,000 watch. The multi-million-dollar rugs he had bought with tax-free blood money. This is the part I still don't understand. A man who already had everything. Why risk it all? Was this just pure pathological greed, or was he so arrogant he thought he was invincible? Let me know your theory in the comments. The jury convicted him guilty. At his sentencing, the judge was scathing. He sentenced Paul Manafort to 7.5 years in federal prison. The Kingmaker, the establishment hero, the man who ran the world, was shamed. He was a convicted felon. But this story has one final, corrupt twist. The Kingmaker had one last ace up his sleeve. He had one last client who owed him. In December 2020, Paul Manafort, the man who ran the world, was given a full presidential pardon. He was convicted. He was sentenced. But in the end, the Kingmaker never truly paid for his crimes. Subscribe if you enjoyed this final Part 10.